cigar a day, no matter how small, keeps the doctor away. And a coffee a day, even if it's instant coffee, keeps the tiredness at bay. Welcome to my YouTube channel, Wisdom Sharer 777, where I read books and share wisdom with you, the listener. Today we are reading The Value of Others. This is The Value of Others by Orion Taraban, part 14, or so I believe. We are finishing the final half of chapter 7. Mind the gap. The other important consequence of the second law of attraction is the attraction gap, the interest discrepancy between the adored and the adorer. So far, I've been speaking of these roles as if they were static entities. This is not the case. In fact, their relative positions are subject to constant fluctuations. At some points, the gap will be large. At other points, it will be functionally non-existent. The same individuals can even switch places from one moment to the next. However, people tend to settle into established relationship dynamics over time, and the more established the dynamic, the more a significant event, like a birth or a promotion or an affair, is required to radically alter the attraction gap or its polarity. Just like different people have preferences with respect to their position in the balance of attraction, different people have preferences with respect to the size of the attraction gap in that balance. Some want that gap to be as small as possible. These are people who prefer egalitarian relationships, approaching an equal distribution of power. Others are comfortable with larger attraction gaps. These dynamics run the gamut from more traditional arguments to lifestyle relationships characterized by the explicit, consensual enactment of dominance and submission. Most people exist on the continuum between a negligible and a substantial attraction gap. The reason these preferences exist is that characteristics that distinguish each role become more apparent as the size of the attraction gap increases. Anyone who read the descriptions of the adorer and the adored in the previous section and thought that it doesn't sound like my relationship at all, or he's talking about an insert negative judgmental adjective here relationship, isn't necessarily wrong. These reactions typically indicate a strong preference for small attraction gaps. Since it's not possible for two people to be equally attracted to each other, the balance of attraction can never disappear entirely. Look at any relationship closely enough, and you'll see that one person is always the adored, and the other is always the adorer at any given moment. However, the two positions increasingly approximate each other as the attraction gap approaches zero. That people have different preferences with respect to both their positions in the balance of attraction and the attraction gap within. That balance helps explain one of the more puzzling phenomena of interpersonal relationships, namely the tendency of some people to repay kindness with hostility. In so many words, kindness is an act of devotion. It indicates a high degree of interest. People generally aren't going out of their way to be indiscriminately kind, and a willingness to expend resources in the service of the other, at least if the kindness is to be at any real benefit to the recipient. This means that the more you express kindness, either in word or deed, the more you are putting yourself in the place of the adorer, and the more you are forcing the other person to occupy the place of the adored. As previously discussed, this is not where most people prefer to be. Everyone begins to feel uncomfortable when someone is too nice to them. They only differ in where they draw the line, and they draw the line at different places with different people. This is because the more care they receive, the more powerful they become. Vis-a-vis, the carer and power tends to make most people feel awkward. My sunglasses are wonky. This is part of the reason so many people have trouble accepting compliments, and they rush to repay their praise in kind. They're trying to neutralize a felt power imbalance. So when your actions threaten to either significantly alter the attraction gap or switch the polarity of the balance entirely, that is, when your actions surpass others' willingness to repay in kind, people will increasingly respond negatively to your expressions of kindness and devotion, from indifference to criticism to contempt. The idea here is to try to prevent the attraction gap from widening or narrowing any more than it has by punishing the behavior responsible. Of course, people are not always aware of this intention, and this intention can be executed inelegantly. But that's what's going on. Your kindness is making the other person uncomfortable, as it is affecting the balance of attraction and its underlying power dynamic, and the other person is responding in such a way as to induce a comparable level of discomfort in you in order to get you to stop. As they say, no good deed goes unpunished. That said, once the kindness stops, generally so, too, does the punishment. This should also help to explain why wanting someone more rarely succeeds in the game of mating and dating. People want what they want, not what they want them. The third law. Now, let's turn our attention to the third law of attraction, which pertains to the fundamental romantic misunderstanding. Here it is. All forms of attraction are fundamentally indistinguishable, are functionally indistinguishable. Another way to say the same thing is that it's not possible to know what you are attracted to, whether you're attracted to the person or to the circumstances surrounding the person. Everyone thinks they can, but they can't. The two are indistinguishable in the same way that gravity and relativity and acceleration are fundamentally interchangeable under general relativity. Put someone in a closed box, and he won't be able to tell whether he's standing still on the surface of the earth or being accelerated toward the floor through a featureless void at 9.8 meters per second or something. In the absence of additional context, both experiences would feel identical. Attraction works in the same way. It's not possible to know whether you're attracted to people themselves or to the conditions around those people. Both experiences feel identical, which makes them functionally indistinguishable. This is the origin of the fundamental romantic misunderstanding, mistaking attraction to features of the relationship for attraction to the individuals themselves. The two are not the same, but they feel the same, and that equivalence of feeling creates a lot of problems in sexual relationships. Again, most people don't believe this when they first hear it, so I typically have to provide examples of how this operates. The easiest way I've found to demonstrate the truth of this law is to ask people to consider how they felt getting back with an ex. This isn't an experience I typically recommend, but people are going to do what they're going to do. Let's take a look at what typically happens. It's often the case that folks are indifferent, if not positively relieved, when they end a relationship, or when someone else ends it for them. There were difficulties and problems. It just wasn't working, and now they'll never have to deal with the other partner again. They are now free, to live life on their own terms, to explore, to expand, to experiment. How wonderful. However, as the weeks pass, these feelings may start to change. The sexual marketplace often offers a rude awakening. Dating can be frustrating and exhausting, and it doesn't seem like there are many good options anyway. The relief subsides, and loneliness and boredom begin to set in. Since most of their friends are in relationships, it becomes increasingly difficult to fill their newfound free time. Then, the fading effect bias, the tendency for bad memories to fade more quickly than good ones, starts to kick in. Maybe it wasn't so bad after all. This revaluation, this revaluation of the past predictably stimulates curiosity. I wonder how she's doing these days, which in turn motivates some covert investigation. I'll just take a peek at their social media. However, this just exasperates the problem. Despite the breakup, the ex seems to be doing just fine, if not better. Life is moving forward for this person, with new experiences and opportunities, and who is that? They sure seem cozy. What does my ex see in him, her? This then can compel people to reach out to their exes, and when the response isn't as warm as it used to be, the reply is delayed, the tone is polite or aloof, it starts to feel as though this person is slipping away from them for good. At this point, many experience a panicked, urgent desire to re-attract their exes. They become positively obsessed with their former partners, ruminating on what they could have done differently and torturing themselves with fantasies of what their exes might be doing right now, and with whom. Some even shell out thousands of dollars on programs, systems, and consultations which promise to get their exes to come crawling back in 90 days or less. And the more rejection they experience, the more desperate and despondent they become. For better or worse, most of these people won't succeed in getting back with their exes. However, a few of them will, and the relief and ecstasy that attend this reunion can hardly be overstated. It's positively rapturous. It's like Simon and Garfunkel's Celicia, was written just for them. This glorious suit of emotions goes on and on and on for a few weeks. At this point, the old dynamic begins to reassert itself, and the problems they never thought they'd have to deal with again start to reemerge. As the curtain falls, a different kind of panic sets in. What have I done? And the players are left to sleep in the beds they have made. Finn. If you've never embarked on this emotional journey, then consider yourself lucky. It's a story that millions have lived and millions more have the dubious pleasure of looking forward to. However, for our intents and purposes, personal experience with this narrative is irrelevant. The important thing to consider here is why the attraction seemed to vacillate so dramatically over the course of the story, from relief and disinterest to desperation and obsession to jubilation and gratitude to frustration and disinterest, in just a few short months. After all, the people involved couldn't have changed all that much in such a short amount of time. They probably weren't much different at the end of the story than they were at the beginning, so they couldn't have become significantly more or less attractive across the same time period. What's going on here? The third law of attraction is the key to solving this mystery. Our hapless protagonists weren't responding to attraction cues in their former partners. They were responding to attraction cues in the circumstances surrounding their former partners, and they couldn't tell the difference. People who are relieved or disinterested when a relationship ends are typically in the place of the adored. However, when their partners finally up and leave, they experience a dramatic reversal in the balance of attraction. After all, as indifferent as they still weren't indifferent enough to leave. The actions of their partners indicate that their partners are now less interested in the relationship than they are, which functionally forces them into the place of the adorer. As time progresses and exes move on with their lives, the attraction gap in the relationship continues to increase. This is precisely when people start to remember how special or beautiful or caring or loving their exes really were. And they begin to wonder whether they've made a terrible mistake in undervaluing their relationship. However, this upswelling of attraction is not a function of seeing their exes more clearly. If anything, their vision is even more distorted by their surging interest, but a function of their new and unaccustomed position in the balance of attraction. They are responding to the circumstances around their exes. What's more, this burgeoning attraction was further inflamed by several important catalysts, including rejection, distance, unobtainability, mystery, uncertainty, danger, and jealousy. All these catalysts all these catalysts tend to increase attraction, whether or not we want them to. This is just how attraction works, and those who think these games don't work on them are often most susceptible to their influence. These games work on everybody, though some require more catalysts for a reaction to occur than others do. In this way, attraction catalysts are kind of like alcohol. People have different tolerances, but if you have enough, you'll end up not seeing straight. And like recovering alcoholics, it's only those who continually keep their vulnerability in the forefront of their minds who tend to avoid the distortions entirely. Paradoxically, their acknowledged powerlessness gives them some measure of control over their experience. In any case, we should now be able to appreciate that the dramatic swings in attraction previously described had nothing to do with any attractiveness cues coming from the X's themselves, and had everything to do with the attractiveness cues coming from the conditions around the X's themselves, and had nothing to do with the attractiveness around the X's in particular, the repolarization of the balance of attraction and the presence of certain attraction catalysts. However, the attraction feels the same to the individuals involved, who fall prey to the fundamental romantic misunderstanding. We can confirm our hypothesis by observing what happens after we reinstate the original conditions. Once the passion of reconciliation subsides, the attraction fades and the initial disinterest reemerges in force. This is because after some time, the old relationship dynamic is reinstated, and the adorer once again comes to occupy the place of the adored, which is always associated with a more muted emotionality. Furthermore, all the attraction catalysts that brought this person's desire to a fever pitch just months before will have been removed in the weeks following the reunion, dampened interest even further. Ironically, the reward for successfully re-attracting an ex is the elimination of all the factors that motivated the effort to do so in the first place. This reveals why the fundamental romantic misunderstanding is so dangerous. If you mistake your attraction to the circumstances around people for your attraction to the people themselves, then what happens? If you're actually successful in securing the desired object, well, you may just end up with someone you're not really attracted to, and that's a problem because you will either need to constantly manipulate the dynamic to keep the attraction alive, or you will ultimately walk away from the relationship. You may not or you will ultimately walk away from a relationship you may not have had any real business being in. Because all forms of attraction are functionally indistinguishable in the game of mating and dating, things are not always what they seem to be. The measure of things. Before I bring the chapter to a close, I'd like to discuss one final topic. So far, I've spoken extensively on how attractiveness is the key to power in sexual relationships. If that's true, then how can players reliably determine how attracted their partners are at any given point in time? That is, how can people measure attraction? Without some kind of metric, much of what we've discussed here would remain too abstract or conceptual to be useful. There's a fairly simple way to determine any player's level of attraction. However, the metric differs slightly depending on the gender of the person. This is because there are biologically determined and culturally informed differences with respect to men's and women's behavior in sexual relationships. In either case, those who feel a high degree of attraction consider simply being in the presence of the other to be an inherently valuable experience. The greater the attraction, the more valuable mere access to the other becomes, and the more valuable the access, the more the attracted parties will be willing to transact for the opportunity to be close to the attractive other. How does this work? The easiest way to measure a woman's attraction is to observe how much she gives. A highly attracted woman will be very generous, especially with her body. She will do things for the man to whom she is attracted that she wouldn't do for others. Among other things, such a woman will not only make it cheap and easy to access her sexual opportunity, but she will put more services on the menu as well. This is because the price of that access is inversely proportional to any given woman's interest, and while this may sound cynical, it makes sense. If a woman isn't authentically attracted to a man, and generally, if she is the adored in the relationship, then she will need to be compensated in other ways in order to stick around, since she doesn't find simply being in the presence of the other to be an inherently valuable experience. A highly attracted woman will show that interest by increasingly relinquishing the privileges afforded to her by her culture, most notably passivity and hypergamy, like flowers. The most attractive woman don't women don't have to move. They can stay rooted in one spot and call the world to them. However, a highly attracted woman doesn't just move in the direction of her desires, she pursues them, so she yields her passivity. What's more, since women enjoy the privilege of mating and dating for gain, she demonstrates her attraction by foregoing this opportunity. Instead, she provides value, and she typically does this by making her partner's life better and easier. This assistance can run the gamut from mundane errands all the way to substantive responsibilities, but in all cases, she is trying to offset the felt value discrepancy she has incurred by being with the one she loves. Her behavior is striking because, in general, a woman doesn't have to act this way. It's a reversal of the status quo. Most women are not attracted to most men, and this relative lack of attraction is manifest in the way women normally behave in the courtship process. They take less action, they make less effort, and they provide less value. After all, this is precisely what enables women to date hypergamously. If they provided more value, they wouldn't be able to date for gain. So a highly attracted woman will signal this interest by deviating from her standard operating procedure as much as possible, by taking more action, by making more effort, and by providing more value. And she typically does this by doing things for the attractive other that she wouldn't do for anyone else. On the other hand, the easiest way to measure a man's attraction is to observe how much he gives up. Think about it. If women typically mate and date for gain, then they are functionally admitting that they believe men are capable of providing more value than the women themselves are capable of providing. Since to want means to lack, we can identify women's self-acknowledged relative deficiencies by considering the qualities of the men they typically want. That is, women's attraction for stronger, richer, higher status, more accomplished, and more competent men is functionally a confession that they believe themselves to be weaker, poorer, lower status, less accomplished, and less competent by comparison. The issue is that men typically must earn these attractive attributes, often through decades of hard work, and women have no inherent claim to the fruits of this labor. So in this case, the status quo is that men retain their value themselves until they are motivated to share it with women in relationships. Remember, hypergamy only benefits women if they can find men willing to part with their resources. If they can't, the resources remain with their original owners. And keep in mind that the relative success and independence of modern women do nothing to change this. It merely serves to narrow the pool of prospective men with whom they would be willing to transact. Like women, men demonstrate their attraction by deviating from their standard operating procedure. If their default posture is to retain their resources, then highly attracted men will give up their earned resources to the attractive other. This generally involves the surrender of value in excess of that which they receive in return. Hence, giving up instead of giving is as previously stated. If this didn't occur, hypergamy literally wouldn't be possible. And among the various resources a man can surrender, his time, his money, his freedom, the most valuable, especially for highly attractive men, is his sexual optionality. As a general rule, the more attracted a man is, the more he will be willing to forego other women. Giving up his sexual optionality is one of the surest signs of high attraction in a man. Women aren't like men in this regard, whereas men whereas most women would not have sex with most men. Most men would have sex with most women. So, men must sacrifice significantly more desire on the altar of exclusivity than women do, since sexual exclusivity is typically a more powerful felt experience for men, and one that is generally more difficult for them to maintain. The surrender of their optionality is one of the most valuable thing. Oh, fuck sake. Since sexual exclusivity is typically a more painful felt experience for men, and one that is generally more difficult for them to maintain, the surrender of their optionality is one of the most desirable goods they can offer, although it may not always be in their best interests to do so. Of course, as discussed in a previous chapter, this can also be a way of conjuring value out of nothing if the man in question has no real options to speak of. However, it is a cost dearly paid in proportion to a man's actual optionality in the sexual marketplace. In any case, both men and women reliably signal their attraction by doing things for the attractive other that they wouldn't ordinarily do for anyone else. And since men and women are ordinarily expected to do different things, this predictably leads to a different gendered suit of behaviors to indicate interest. A woman's interest can be measured by what she gives. A man's interest can be measured by what he gives up. In this chapter, I introduced the most important dimension of power pertaining to sexual relationships, attraction. After defining this concept in relation to sexual marketplace value, I argued that, all other things being equal, the more attractive partner is the more powerful player in any sexual relationship. This led to a discussion of the three laws of attraction and several of the constructs to which they give rise, including the balance of attraction, the attraction gap, and the fundamental romantic misunderstanding. Shh. Using these ideas, I was then able to explain a number of otherwise mysterious phenomena and provide a reliable metric for measuring people's levels of attraction. At this point, I've provided an overview of various aspects of the negotiation phase of relationships. In the next chapter, I'll move on to the maintenance phase so that we may better understand why some relationships go the distance and others do not. If you'd like to further explore the topics presented in this chapter, please click on the link in the description below to access a curated playlist on Dr. Orion Taraban's Psych Hacks channel on YouTube. Also, if you would like to see awesome skulls and bones on my Etsy shop, then click the link in the description below, the other one, not the YouTube one, the Etsy one, to look at products like this sheep skull that I have sourced from the mountains in Wales. Stay tuned to complete this insightful book. Next, we will be on chapter 8. I am planning to have a technological detox, which is why I am going overboard with the video production, sometimes doing 2 a day. I'm going to try and narrow that down, and it's just I've been struggling with and having enough storage on my phone, but I'm going to try and do an entire chapter as one video, which may be a bit long drawn out. You can sit and listen or watch in one sitting, or you don't have to, but watch it in order, part 1 through to whatever number we end up on. But yeah, tomorrow we will read chapter 8. like, comment, subscribe. Let me know what book you may want me to read next. I'm probably going to go to one of my Stoicism books. I've got quite a collection of Stoic books. So, something good, something new. Anyway, spend some time in nature. And don't forget to always keep reading and learning new things. Peace out.